Greetings, fellow Bible readers. Welcome to week 14 of our 2016 read through of the Bible. This week, we're finishing up the book of 2 Samuel, and we're going to head into 1 Kings, just a little bit into that book. And the readings for this week really focus in on the end of David's reign. And the major event that we see is the adultery with Bathsheba and how that really impacts everything else that goes on in David's life from that point forward. So let's dive on in with the details for each day. On day 1, we look at chapters 11, 12, and 13, where we get the account of that adultery with Bathsheba. And as you read through that section, especially in chapter 11, pay attention to all the sins that David breaks. Just kind of keep track of which commandments he's breaking in order to carry out this affair. Also, in chapter 12, there's a beautiful expression of David's confidence in the resurrection. The way that he handles the news of his son dying is a wonderful model for Christian confidence that the dead will rise and that there will be a reunion in heaven for believers. Then finally, in chapter 13, we see David as a total absentee father in dealing with the situation between Amnon and Tamar. And you'll especially want to pay attention to the fact that Tamar's brother is Absalom, who's going to go on in future readings to end up rebelling against King David. On day 2, we look at chapters 14 and 15. We see Absalom's return after his revenge on Amnon, but it doesn't seem that Absalom has fully kind of gotten this out of his system, and so we see how he begins to work a rebellion against King David. And this rebellion is in many ways a family affair. Not only is it David's son who's rebelling against him, but one of the major advisors, a guy by the name of Ahithophel, who goes to Absalom's side. If you pay attention to the family tree of Bathsheba as it's talked about in 2 Samuel chapter 11 verse 3, and then you skip ahead to chapter 23 verse 34, you find out that Ahithophel was the grandfather of Bathsheba. And so some of his support for Absalom may very well have been tied to the way that he didn't like David's treatment of his daughter in the whole affair that went down between David and Bathsheba. On day 3, as we look at chapters 16 through 18, we see the rebellion as it unfolds and occurs. And one of the things that's very apparent is God's hand in that rebellion and how he uses it to accomplish his purposes, both in finishing up that punishment he had promised on David for his adultery, and also his guiding of events to make sure that the rule would stay with David and with the descendant Solomon that the Lord had chosen to follow David. On day 4, we look at chapters 19 and 20. And in those chapters, as the rebellion winds to a close and a new rebellion gets started, we see David's willingness to forgive and yet an unwillingness to forgive on the part of a lot of people around David. The Israelites and the people of Judah unwilling to forgive each other that lead to the second rebellion. We see the unwillingness of Joab to be accommodating to the change in leadership for the army and ending up committing another murder to protect his position and his influence. On day 5, we get to chapters 21 and 22, and the background for chapter 1 is actually way back in Joshua chapter 9. You might remember these Gibeonites from back in our previous readings. These are the people that Joshua had spared because of that covenant that had come about through the deception of the Gibeonites. And so if you want to go back and reread chapter 9 of the book of Joshua, it'll give you the whole rest of the story for why this is going on. Then in chapter 22, when you read that psalm of David about his life and his experiences, just think about events from David's life that would plug in with the language and tone of that psalm. Then on day 6, as we look at chapters 23 and 24, and especially with chapter 24 and the counting of David's fighting men, there is a lesson driven home that sometimes it's worth paying full price for certain things. David pays full price in order to be able to sacrifice the offering that appeases the Lord's anger to stop that plague that was ravaging the nation of Judah. Incidentally, it's there at the threshing floor of Araunah, that is the spot that later becomes the site of the temple, where the work that Jesus would do of paying for our sins is pictured by all of the sacrifices. The fact that Jesus would someday pay the full price for our sins. And then finally, on day 7, as we read chapters 1 and 2 of the book of 1 Kings, we see the kingdom of Israel transferred from David to his descendant Solomon, the one that God would use to build the temple in Jerusalem for his worship. That's all for this week. We'll see you next week.